You're watching NRATV with Bill Whittle.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hot Mike Show from Los Angeles, California. I'm Bill Whittle, sitting in for Hot Mike, who unfortunately is in the hospital again. He wasn't quite sure about the difference between exfoliating and defoliating, so he left some weed killer on his face overnight, and he's not really looking very good. We hope to have him back by tomorrow. Question for today is, can Hollywood be returned to conservative values, or at the very least to the values that we call conservative today? You know, things like patriotism and love of country and all the rest. So before we get into this issue about some of the things that can happen, let's take a little look back at what's changed in Hollywood, especially during the last 30 or 40 years or so. One of the premises of this show is that so much of politics comes to us through the pop culture, and by pop culture we mean movies, music, television, and so on. And so much of what we get from the pop culture is so subtle that we don't know we're getting a message at all. That's why it's so effective. The left has owned the pop culture for 40 years now, but before the left did, the conservatives, people like us, patriots, America lovers, own the pop culture. And so when I say political messages come to us in a way that we don't even get it, let's talk about one of the most political movies that I think I've ever seen. And I owe this analysis to my friend Lionel Chetwin, by the way. Let's talk about an incredibly political movie called It's a Wonderful Life. You all remember It's a Wonderful Life, don't you? There it is. The Jimmy Stewart Christmas movie. And surely you look at this and you say, how could you possibly say, Bill, that It's a Wonderful Life is a political movie? Well, it is a political movie, and I'll tell you why. It's a political movie because of what it says about America. And what It's a Wonderful Life says about America is this. It's a Wonderful Life says that America is a fundamentally good place. It's Bedford Falls, and it's filled with good people who do the right thing. The protagonist, Jimmy Stewart's character, decides to kill himself, and he removes himself from society. And it's kind of like a Christmas Carol. You see what the world would be like if it weren't for Jimmy Stewart. And when Jimmy Stewart's character is removed from Bedford Falls, all of the things that he had done as a good person are also removed from the movie and from Bedford Falls. And Bedford Falls becomes Potterville. It becomes a greedy, nasty place where the streets are dirty and violent and everybody's depressed and horrible. But this is the point, folks. That's not the natural state of America. The natural state of America is to be Bedford Falls. And when Jimmy Stewart returns to Bedford Falls, returns to Potterville, I should say, when the virtuous man is put back into the world becomes a virtuous place again. And Jimmy Stewart is, he's the richest man in the world. It's a wonderful life. It is an allegory about America, the kind of country it is. And the country it is a result of the people that live in it. By the way, speaking of the difference between Hollywood then and now, some of you know this. Jimmy Stewart, the actor in It's a Wonderful Life, failed to get into the U.S. Army Air Corps. He wanted to get in, but he was underweight. He was about 7 pounds underweight. He was too skinny. So he went to one of the trainers. He was a movie star by this point. Let's be really clear about this. So he went to a Hollywood trainer who helped him bulk up a little bit, put on enough pounds to get him into the Army Air Corps. He was the first celebrity, Hollywood celebrity during World War II to wear a uniform. But there's more to it than that. He didn't just, and I'm not trying to demean anybody else, but Jimmy Stewart wasn't just a figurehead doing bond drives. Jimmy Stewart wanted to be in the action. He wanted to be in. He's a pilot. He was a pilot before he joined the military. So Jimmy Stewart is one of the very few people to go from a private to a colonel in 4 years. And Jimmy Stewart doesn't become just some guy working in a desk someplace in there. He was eventually made head of the 703rd Bombardment Group. He flew combat missions over Kiel on the U-boats. He went to Ludwigshafen, so on. He became commanding officer of a bomb group. And as a matter of fact, in World War II, he flew a completely in Vietnam, he flew a completely unpublicized mission over Vietnam in a B-52 on an arc light raid. He wasn't just a pretend soldier. He was the real deal. He retired as a brigadier general in the United States Air Force. Hard to imagine George Clooney or Matt Damon or somebody like that doing those kind of things today. So that's one of the reasons we have the guests with us that we have. I just want to add one little personal story about Jimmy Stewart to tell you the difference between Hollywood then and now. When I first came to Los Angeles in 1988, the first job I had was as a temp for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car picks you up. So in Beverly Hills, I would go to Beverly Hills, pick up clients from their homes, bring them to the rental car agency, and so on. And on my first day, on my first trip, I barely knew the city. I just arrived there. I went and picked up somebody in Beverly Hills, and as I was waiting for them to come out of the house, I looked across the street, across and down one, was a fairly tidy house. It looked exactly like that because that's the actual house. And while I was watching, a Hollywood tour bus pulled up outside this house. You can see the curtains are drawn there in the house. And as I was watching, this tour bus pulled up outside the house, and the curtains parted, and this old man came to the window, and he looked out, and he waved, and he smiled. And the person who came out to the window of his house and waved and smiled at the tour bus was Jimmy Stewart. He came to the window and waved and smiled, and he was known to do that whenever one of these tour buses would come by, and they came by quite a bit. There you go. That's what you got to see from old Hollywood back in the day. Jimmy Stewart would come and wave and say hi, and on the Tonight Show, Jimmy Stewart said, of course I do this. These people gave me this incredible life. They gave me a chance to be a movie star, all this money, this beautiful house. We don't see that kind of thing in Hollywood today because Hollywood's not the same kind of place. So what changed and how did it change? Well, It's a Wonderful Life is a story about America as a fundamentally good place. But in the 60s, we started to see the left get a hold of things, and they started making movies where America was not such a good place. Bonnie and Clyde, which is a terrific movie, by the way, absolutely fantastic film. Bonnie and Clyde with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway was a movie whose heroes were murderers and bank robbers, and they glamorized them. And they made the murderers and the bank robbers look, well, as you can see, glamorous and exciting and cool. They made a movie called Easy Rider. Easy Rider was a fantastically new movie. We hadn't seen anything like it, but in Easy Rider, we find that America's not a nice place at all. In Easy Rider, we find that that America is in fact a dark place. It's an evil place. It's a place filled with hidden menace. And only the people who can escape from the culture are the ones who become the heroes. They're anti-heroes. That's basically what happened. We saw, if you really want to know what happened to Hollywood, you can't do better than compare two movies, the original and the remake. In 1962, Hollywood made a movie called The Manchurian Candidate. It starred Frank Sinatra as an army investigator who was tracking down a prisoner of war who had been brainwashed by the Red Chinese to kill the president. That's why he was called The Manchurian Candidate. He was brainwashed by the Red Chinese. In 2004, they remade the exact same movie. This time it was with Denzel Washington in the role of that Frank Sinatra had played. Same exact story. A soldier has been programmed, brainwashed to kill the president, but this time the people doing the brainwashing are not the Red Chinese. It's the Manchurian Corporation. Did you get that? It's the Manchurian Corporation. It's American businessmen who are the villains, not the Red Chinese communists. American businessmen. That's the Manchurian Candidate. Because if you're going to start a big business in the United States, you certainly want to name it Manchurian. What a reach. But that's how they have to prove their point. They changed the villains. We used to be the heroes. Now we're the villains. They used to be the villains. Now they're the heroes. And during the Iraq War, we saw all kinds of anti-American movies made. We saw Redacted, In the Valley of Elah. We saw Lions for Lambs, all of that. Redacted made, no exaggeration, Redacted made $22,000 total domestic release across the entire United States. All of it. That's their total box office. Directed by Brian De Palma, horrible anti-war, horribly unfair movie. And then a couple years ago, Clint Eastwood comes out and makes American Sniper, and that movie makes $108 million on its first weekend. It's a runaway hit, and that movie portrayed Americans in a good light for a change. So, can Hollywood be returned to conservative values? No, it cannot. But the good news is it doesn't have to, because Hollywood, as we know it, is going extinct. It may already be dead on its feet. So let's bring in our guests today, who are two really interesting guys, Mike Lemmon and Richard Rosenthal. These two gentlemen are veterans. They've got their own production company. They're going to start making movies, trying very hard to make a movie about the John Ringo zombie series, the Black Tide Rising series. And here are two filmmakers who are veterans who are trying to launch a full-length feature film. We thought we'd have them on our show to talk to us a little bit about the difference between Hollywood then and now, and how veterans especially are portrayed in the movies. So, guys, it's great to have you with us. Mike, let's start with you. What do you think about what I just said? What do you think about the way that Hollywood treats conservatives today versus how they treated them before?
it's there's definitely a clear political bent to how movies are made and how they're marketed and how certain people are portrayed. One of the things that we want to get back to is we just want to tell good stories. We don't want to get into the business of, casting heroes and villains amongst, our fellow countrymen. We just want to tell a story that as many people as possible can enjoy, and that has the kind of American values that you talk about that just about everyone can appreciate.
Richard, that I think what he just said is really spot on. I say this with the greatest admiration. I don't mean to be denigrating in this at all. But a number of churches have made movies, and some of them were relatively successful, like Fireproof and so on. But if you're going to reach people and change their minds, you can't give them a political message. You have to give them a great story. What is it about these Black Tide Rising stories that you like so much that made you want to make this movie and start this film business?
When I was first introduced to the publisher and she sent me the books, I had been making vampire and zombie type movies, and I'd really had enough of it. And when I started reading the stories, I realized this was another apocalyptic type story again. What really caught me as I continued to read was the characters and how John Ringo had built this family of people who were still intact after this worldwide pandemic takes place. And he poses it not only in the mother and father's characters, but he also does the same thing with the two teenage girls who are very strong personalities. I happen to have a teenage daughter. And what I liked about the story was it was a coming of age story. It showed two strong, in this case, women having to rise to the top during a set of circumstances that were less than desirable. And they do just that. And they learn to step out and they learn to step up, which was most important. So that it was the characters that drew me into what was going on.
I see. Guys, I saw something recently online, and it was a reference to The Walking Dead. Now, in the Ringo stories, the zombies are brought about by a mutation of a plague. It's sort of a biological weapon, as I understand. But certainly, zombies and zombie movies are big hits, and they've been big hits for a long time. The Walking Dead, as you can see here, is one of the runaway hits of all time, and it's just a cultural phenomenon, The Walking Dead. But here's what I think is interesting for both of you guys. Mike, let me ask you about this. I saw somebody was talking about The Walking Dead once, and if I could remember who said it, I certainly would credit him for it, but it wasn't me. But basically what they said about The Walking Dead was The Walking Dead is so popular because in a civilization without any adventure, the only adventure is to destroy the civilization. And that all of this progressive, happy, socialist, left-wing world where everything basically works and the power happens magically and the country's magically defended and all of this stuff just sort of happens underground and nobody gets to see it. This person said that there is a fundamental longing among everybody, especially among young men, to see what they are made out of. And that's why The Walking Dead is so popular with so many people. It gives you a chance to think about if the world turned upside down like that and it was me and a gun and 5 other people, could we stay alive, yes or no? What do you think about that as a vet and as a filmmaker?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think, in a society where we're generally pretty comfortable, we've got all those things you talk about. We've got power and water, and we don't really have to worry about where our next meal is coming from in a lot of cases. We do sort of gravitate towards things that make us think about, okay, what if we didn't have the society that we have right now? And what if there was this big threat out there that we had to physically defend ourselves from and just be on the watch for every day? And how would each one of us handle that, and how would we survive? I think there's definitely a lot of truth to why that genre draws a lot of people in.
Richard, I like to say, I think there's really a good case to be made for this, that essentially all storytelling is essentially conservative. And it's essentially conservative because all good stories are about individuals. Even if you do a movie about a football team, you don't cover the whole team. Even if you're doing a movie about a football team in high school, let's say, like Friday Night Lights or something, you concentrate on 2 or 3 people. But the reason I say that storytelling is conservative is because when James Bond goes to confront the bad guys, he doesn't go armed with a sternly worded letter from the United Nations and then drive off in a Prius at a reasonable speed, right? I mean, everything about movie making is the kind of things that we value here as conservatives. It's about individuals with guns and heroism against incredible odds with fast cars, beautiful women, and no matter how Hollywood tries, their philosophy, their political philosophy, gets lost in films like American Sniper, which is made by some of the most progressive anti-military people in the world, but told the story about a soldier, and that story outweighed their political biases.
And it's true, and you see this coming out of Hollywood on a pretty regular basis. The thing about the Black Tide Rising stories that we like is the idea that this family moves forward where the slate for society has been wiped clean and everybody is starting over. And it is this family that becomes the foundation, if you will, of what society winds up being. And it's a very well-rooted and well-founded type of family. You know, the children respect the parents respect the children. Everybody understands their place. They understand what they have to contribute to the situation they're in. And that's the thing that really is attractive in this storytelling. And that's what Ringo does. And as he moves forward through the story and progresses, he keeps this picking up speed as they start to pick up stragglers and they start meeting people who are also survivors like themselves, but those survivors are adrift and they need some focus. They need something to help them have a reason for living. And the family winds up being the middle of this catalyst as things do move forward.
I think I would say virtually everybody watching this show today has at some point or another during the last 8 years or longer felt that things are really slipping out there, that things are starting to come apart. And I know many of our viewers have wondered how they and their families can preserve themselves and preserve this idea of America. And it sounds like a fascinating idea, and it certainly sounds like there's an audience out there for it. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. When we come back on the other side of the break, we're going to be talking about not so much what gets made or how, in this particular case, but how things get made, because Hollywood as it exists today is essentially, it's The Walking Dead. It's an animated corpse. The world is changing very quickly because of the internet. We'll cover how movies are getting made now and in the future when we come back in just a couple minutes. This is the Hot Mic Show right here on NRATV.